Quiet.
Mr. President-elect,
Go ahead.
can you state
She's asking a
categorically,
question. Don't
Mr.
be
President-elect, can you give us a question?
Don't be
You are
rude.
attacking us. Can you give us a question?
Don't be rude.
Can
No,
you
I'm
give
not
us a
going to give you a
question?
question. I'm not going to give you a question.
Can you state categorically?
You are fake news.
Sir. Dr. Dave Janda, welcome back to Dave versus the MSM. I'd like to thank you for joining me today. Thank you for networking this information. The more people we bring into our freedom fold, our freedom community, well, the more people that are going to make it to the other end of this very dark tunnel that the globalist cult has created. That's our goal, to help as many people as possible. And I thank you for taking the effort to join us today, because there have been tremendous efforts to block our content across all the platforms. And the reason is because it's effective. It gives you information that you're not going to get through the bought-off lamestream fake media, that you're not going to get from other sources. And your efforts, your tireless efforts, many times unwelcomed efforts, surely not thanked for efforts of educating others, will in the end pay off for our country, for our constitutional republic, and for those future generations that the cult has targeted. I want to talk today about something I started speaking about many years ago. I was called a conspiracy theorist at the time. What's new? Might be conspiracy, but it's conspiracy reality. And it's about this issue of created polycrisis, chaos. You see, my mom, the history teacher, decades ago, taught me about the Hegelian dialectic, where power brokers create problems, and then they provide the solutions, in quotes, which ultimately doesn't benefit the very people that are looking for the solutions, that were adversely affected by the chaos, the disruptive event that the power brokers created. But out of these events, their solutions always give more power, control, and financial resources to the power brokers that created the problem to begin with. And they have upped their game over the decades to now they've created a poly event, many-sided chaotic events. Russia, Ukraine, Middle East, China, Taiwan, supply chains, borders, drug overdoses through fentanyl, safety and security issues, financial destruction. This is all planned. Too many people say, wow, what a bad set of accidents. What a bad set of coincidences. What incompetence. No. Don't fall into that trap. It's all planned. And we're going to, it's one of the best political writers of our time, James Howard Kunstler, recently wrote an article about the Headless Horsemen riding blindly into chaos. And I want to give you a couple quotes out of this, because it was really a great piece. He first quotes Doug Casey, who said, "As shocking as it may sound, the institution of the state itself is the real enemy. It's time to carefully analyze your relation to it, because it's that state that creates the problems, and their solutions only benefits them and their handlers who put them there." James Howard Kunstler. You have to wonder, has there ever been a country that marched off to war with no head of state at the top of the war machine? It's exactly that bad in our country right now, with a broken animatronic Halloween scarecrow popping in and out of the White House to yell incoherently at election campaign events for a successor too scared of the predicament she's in to think straight. Really, no one is in charge. And if any of the leading actors on the scene really were, the situation could get really worse. No one is in charge. The Headless Horseman. Not an accident, not a coincidence. not from incompetence. It's what the power brokers, the banking families, have put into play so that in the end, they can get more power, control, and financial resources. Kunstler goes on, America, you are a headless horseman riding blindly into chaos. In fact, the entire Democratic Globalist Party and the Rhino Globalists and its deep state intel blob members and partners have melted down into a desperate mob of political criminals frantic to evade accounting for their acts. So then setting the world on fire is all they have left, a fitting act of revenge for a faction thwarted in its mad drive to merely wreck the United States for the sake of social justice and equity. The Democrat globalists and Rhino globalists of 2024 made exactly the same mistake that their predecessors, the Jacobins, made in France back in 1794. We've talked about that. My mom, the history teacher, I brought you her lessons over the years about the Jacobins and the French Revolution. But listen to Kunstler's analysis. It's on target. They just couldn't tell when they'd gone too far with their insults against the public interest and common decency. Sound familiar? As the French Revolution ground on and on, by 1793, the Jacobins gained control of the Committee of Public Safety, which actually carried out policy. The Committee on Public Safety sought to remake French society by turning its cultural norms upside down and by killing as many of its political opponents as possible, thus the Reign of Terror, when for a whole year heads rolled from their guillotine in the Place de la Concorde, usually without benefit of a trial. The ghoulish extravaganza of gore and death grossed out those in the country who had not lost their minds. One night in July of 1794, as the Jacobin boss Robespierre took to the rostrum in the convention for the umpteenth time to denounce his enemies and announce new death sentences, members in the chamber commenced throwing food at him. That was the turning point. And it turned really hard and really fast that most of France was amazed. Within 48 hours, Robespierre and many of his cohorts got under the national razor. And that was the end of Jacobism and all its insane measures to wreck what was left of society after 5 years of revolution. Which brings us to 2024 in the good old US of A. Kunstler states, there are many in our country today who are not insane. You, me. I hasten to say that this is what's gotten the cult really panicked and desperate right now. Too many people have awakened to what's really going on. Much like what happened to Robespierre and the Jacobins in 1794. There are many in our country today who are not insane, just as in France back in 1794. In the mad effort to evade judgment for their acts, the Democrat globalists and Rhino globalists and their blob cadres are either trying to oft Mr. Trump directly or are looking the other way while other nefarious parties attempt the wicked business. A headless horseman called the globalist. And they're desperate and they're panicked because, well, too many people have awakened. U.S. consumer confidence plunges most in 3 years as labor market weakens significantly. Too many people are calling out their headless horsemen, right? The Kamala Harris plan to create more housing shortages, actually. Mike Shedlock, if you want more shortages, then artificially stimulate demand, and that's exactly what Harris's walls are proposing. They're getting called out. Just as her price controls, which would lead to shortages, are getting called out. Just as their blindfolded approach to the poor people in Florida, Georgia, Western North Carolina, and Eastern Tennessee that were devastated by the hurricane. Go back to Bush and Katrina. his response, although delayed, looks incredible compared to what we've seen out of the Headless Horsemen, called the globalists. There's enough money to send for bombs to Ukraine and Israel, but there's zero for the people who have been devastated in this country. Much like there was little sent to those that were destroyed in Lahaina, in Maui. Headless Horsemen. Yeah. And the whistleblowers are stepping up, exposing the Headless Horsemen further. Whistleblower, the Biden-Harris administration is sabotaging the Trump campaign. Yeah. The ultimate sabotage was what occurred in Butler and also at the golf course down in West Palm Beach, right? With those one J13 and S15, right? Those two failed attempts. That's what happens when they get desperate and panic. Cornered rats always lash out. And these globalists are rats. And then to try to promote more issues. Remember when the horrible event in Nashville occurred? They withheld the shooter's manifesto because they felt it would lead to inspire more of these horrendous events. Good, okay. But with this guy, this goofball that has ties to Ukraine and the wonderful intelligence agencies, they released his manifesto immediately. Why? Because the Headless Horseman is desperate and panicked and lashing out because maybe it might inspire somebody else. But the whistleblowers continue. I've always told you, whistleblowers are going to flip the tables on the cult. Finally, they will get to a point where across the board, they can't take it anymore. We just had ICE step forward and say, wait a minute. Over 10,000 rapists, over 10,000 murders were willfully, by the Headless Horsemen, released into this country to destroy the American public. Over 625,000 convicted criminals were released into this country knowingly by the Headless Horsemen, that you can put Biden and Harris and Obama and Clinton and all the rest of their names on it. Whistleblowers. FBI whistleblower gives emotional testimony in front of Congress about highly inappropriate retaliation against him. Why? For questioning about events that occurred and government involvement in those events, including J6. And at that same hearing, the Inspector General of the Department of Justice got up and said, yeah, there were informants and there were contractors and there were agents, in the crowd and in the Capitol. Yeah. Over by the DNC and the RNC, when they found those pipe sparklers. Yeah. And then we had some whistleblowers that were behind a report that was recently released through the House Foreign Affairs Committee about Afghanistan. The Headless Horsemen, Biden and Harris, were hell-bent on leaving Afghanistan, ignoring military advice, NATO objections, and Afghan pleas. Key figures in Afghanistan and around the world pleaded with the Headless Horsemen against a total U.S. withdrawal, arguing the landlocked nation simply needed more time. This in the report. Let me give you another quote from the report. Across the board, this report paints a picture of an administration that was heavily fixated on the political optics of the withdrawal while lacking the foresight to plan ahead even for predictable scenarios. Quote, Harris was the last person in the room when Joe Biden made the decision to withdraw U.S. forces from Afghanistan, a fact she boasted shortly after Joe Biden issued his go-to-zero order. She was one of the 15 administration officials whom the report recommended Congress pass a resolution condemning over this debacle. The Headless Horseman has been outed. And what do? They bring in another Headless Horseman to try to help out, right? Zelensky, the World Economic Forum, globalist, totalitarian little thug that he is. Worth noting that Zelensky was flown into Pennsylvania on U.S. Air Force C-17 to campaign for Harris and Walz. Yeah. They're panicked and they're desperate. And the Headless Horseman is just riding around aimlessly. And that's just what the banking families want. Because ultimately their goal is to take the financial system down of the world, and they need a rudderless ship in the United States, a headless horseman, to not get in their way. The Biden-Harris administration is using military assets to fly a foreign leader into battleground states in order to undermine their political opponents. Zelensky is now touring ammunition factories in Pennsylvania, attacking Trump and Vance in American media outlets. A foreign leader is essentially campaigning for Harris and Walz on American soil. Molly Hemingway, journalist, said, "This is an impeachable offense on the part of Biden and Harris, and dangerously reckless move on Zelensky's part to campaign for Harris in a battleground state on U.S. taxpayer funds." Well, guess what? By the time he left, he got an additional $8 billion of our money, taxpayer money, to kill more on behalf of his owners, the cult, to create more chaos and crisis. And it's not an accident that the dock workers, with no negotiations, were allowed to go on strike. It wasn't an accident that those poor people in the southeast part of the United States were abandoned. Just as thousands of American citizens were abandoned by the headless horsemen of Biden and Harris in Afghanistan. It's not an accident. It's a horrendous track record. Now, 95 to 99% of the people you know don't know anything about what I just spoke about. And that's where you come in. Let me be the bad guy. Take this information and show them the video. Forward the video. Show them the video. And then encourage them to fact check everything I just said. I encourage you to do that now and not wait a day or two before their installation operation in November. I thank you for joining me today. We are available with extra shows, content, guests, analysis, archives to all of our shows at davejanda.com. Become a member, 30 cents a day of our Freedom family. It entitles you to the 4 to 5 extra shows I do a week, in addition to the podcast, commercial free, of our 3-hour radio show every Sunday. Second to none. Best radio show. I know I'm biased, but it's true. The best, most comprehensive, informative radio show in the country on weekends. In fact, I've been told, and I agree with this because I listen to a lot of things, a lot of shows. If you want to know what the syndicated radio hosts are going to talk about that next week, listen to my show on Sunday. That way you don't have to waste 3 hours a day during the week, because you'll get it all 3 hours, as opposed to wasting 15 hours on the syndicated radio shows across the country the entire week. Fact. I thank you for joining me today. Until next time, Dave Janda signing off. Dream big and dare to fail. Thanks for your time today.